America's largest city is located along the coastal region of the Atlantic Ocean on the Boston, Philadelphia, Washington axis. In Europe, New York is equivalent to Manhattan. On the chessboard island, embraced by two rivers, are the huge skyscrapers and office buildings, restaurants, museums, hotels, and sites. The majority of the population lives in the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, or the neighboring New Jersey, and only come into the city to work. The bridge, with its modern lines, was finished in 1964 and bears the name of Giovanni di Verrazzano, a Florentine sailor who in 1524 wrote the following to French King Francis I about Manhattan. It has a very favorable location with two outstanding hills and an enormous river with a deep mouth. However, the French, who were just waging war, did not want to establish a colony in the New World. A memorial made of the stones of the Verrazzano Castle in Toscana has been erected at the bottom of the suspension bridge of 8,500 feet in length. The settlement did not extend beyond the boundaries of Manhattan until 1898. Long since incorporated, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island used to be independent small towns. The famous Wall Street with its stock exchange, located on the south corner of the island, to the north are the cafes and bars of Greenwich Village, above it the Midtown, the center of the city, and Broadway with its theaters and great cinemas. East of Central Park are the elegant small shops and houses of the East Side. To the west are the run-down slums of the West Side, the scene of West Side Story. New York's most seasoned old bridge is the Brooklyn Bridge, which starts from Manhattan and bends over the East River, ending at Sand Street. The bridge was planned by John A. Roebling, who was of German origin, founded the largest steel cable factory of the world, and who was an expert in building suspension bridges. During the construction, Roebling had an accident which resulted in blood poisoning, and after 2 weeks of suffering, he died, leaving his son, who had served under General Grant in the Civil War, to make his plans come true. The bridge didn't bring luck to the family, as during the construction, Washington Roebling became paralyzed and was only able to watch the grandiose opening ceremony from a wheelchair from a window of his house. The longest suspension bridge of the world of that time was opened in the spring of 1883, in the presence of the President of the United States, Chester Arthur, and the Governor of New York, Grover Cleveland, later to become president. In the evening, the two politicians saluted the disabled builder by leading a huge crowd in a torchlight parade. We can enjoy the nicest panorama of the downtown from the bridge. Public transport in the city, when not brought to a screeching halt by a strike, is well organized and speedy. Tram transportation has been terminated, but the buses, and especially the metro, called subway here, take us anywhere. The Underground Railway is 350 kilometers long, with 462 stops on its 23 different lines, covering all districts except Staten Island. The simplest way to sightsee in New York is to use the open-deck, so-called hop-on, hop-off buses. These services are familiar from big European cities, stopping at every site, so even tourists who are less familiar with the city can't get lost and don't have to worry about driving and parking. After having a look around, we can get back on the bus. With one ticket, we can get off and on again all day, as we like. New York is the only American city where it makes no sense to rent a car, or only if we want to take a day trip out of the city. Walt Whitman wrote the following in his poem entitled Broadway. What hurrying human tides, or day or night, what passions, winnings, losses, ardors swim thy waters, what whirls of evil, bliss and sorrow stem thee, what curious questioning glances, glints of love, leer, envy, scorn, contempt, hope, aspiration. Thou portal, thou arena, thou are the myriad long-drawn lines and groups, Could but thy flagstones, curbs, facades tell their inimitable tales, thy windows rich and huge hotels, thy sidewalks wide. Thou of the endless, sliding, mincing, shuffling feet, thou like the party-colored world itself, like infinite, teeming, mocking life, the visored, vast, unspeakable show and lesson. New York has always inspired artists and architects as much as writers, poets, musicians, and filmmakers. It's enough to think of Truman Capote's books, Neil Simon's theater plays, Scorsese's Taxi Driver, and Woody Allen's films, plus the song entitled New York, New York. The Empire State Building used to be the highest building in the world until the ill-fated World Trade Center surpassed it. Though the highest skyscrapers in the world today are in Asia, the 102-story-high Empire State Building has no need to hide itself even today, especially if we consider that it was built in 1931, during the period of the Great Depression. The building holds its own even in the 21st century, but it's so old that it served as a landing place for Zeppelins. This is visible on black and white archive pictures illustrating the history of the tower, starting from the construction up to the present. For the construction, immigrants and Mohawk Indians were employed, who are famous for their lack of acrophobia. In the entrance hall, pictures of painter Roy Sparkia show the 7 miracles of the ancient times, and as the 8th miracle, the Empire State Building. The express elevator delivers visitors to the lookout terrace at a speed of 122 feet per second. The builders of the city found especially solid bedrock at about 200 feet. In Central Park, we can even see the huge reddish-brown rounded rocks which made it possible to use the same skyscraper production methods developed in Chicago. The expression skyscraper originated in New York, where the tops of the high buildings are often covered by clouds of steam coming from the river. The engineers Shreve, Lamb, and Harmon designed one of the most characteristic buildings of the 20th century. The Empire State Building is built of 60,000 tons of steel, particularly solid chrome steel and granite, based on a detailed construction plan with carefully disciplined work. Thus it was completed quickly with 4 or 5 stories being added each week. The building is still one of the favorite places of tourists visiting New York City. The observation deck is on the 86th floor. With the express elevator, we can reach even the 102nd floor. That floor is closed to the public and doesn't offer as good a view as the terrace. One of the largest and most famous cities in the world is lying at our feet. To the south, on the tip of Manhattan Island, the downtown area sprawls. The silhouettes of famous skyscrapers are easily recognizable, and the place of the World Trade Center Twin Towers is painfully empty. Farther away, the Statue of Liberty holds its torch high, and among the checkerboard-like, geometrically ordered streets, we recognize Broadway, winding a bit irregularly. To the west, Madison Square Garden calls attention to itself, while on the north, Rockefeller Center extends towards the sky, and behind both of these, the green of Central Park. Truman Capote wrote the following in his novel entitled Breakfast at Tiffany's, which was later to become a film starring Audrey Hepburn and George Papar. I'm always drawn back to the places where I've lived, the houses and their neighborhoods. For instance, there's a brownstone in the East 70s where, during the early years of the war, I had my first New York apartment. It was a one-room crowded with attic furniture, a sofa and fat chairs upholstered in that itchy particular red velvet that one associates with hot days on a train. The walls were stucco and a color rather like tobacco spit. Everywhere, in the bathroom too, there were prints of Roman ruins freckled with brown age. The single window looked out on a fire escape. Even so, my spirits heightened whenever I felt in my pocket the key to this apartment, with all its gloom. It was still a place of my own, the first, and my books were there, and jars of pencils to sharpen, everything I needed, so I felt to become the writer I wanted to be. Broadway is perhaps the most well-known street in New York and also the longest. It's 38 kilometers long, cutting through the island of Manhattan. Originally, a highway straight as an arrow had been planned, but some obstinate Dutch aldermen back then didn't allow trees to be cut down or whole buildings to be destroyed, and so Broadway became a bit more jagged, snaking its way along. Those who think the whole road is surrounded by theaters are mistaken. The world-famous Broadway itself is only the section between 42nd and 66th Streets. The nicest example of the young Uno's architectural style is the City Hall. The neo-Gothic style is represented by the Trinity Church, while samples of post-Civil War architecture can be seen around Union Square, but Art Nouveau and Modernism are also represented. Let's call Central Park the lungs of Manhattan. The area of the totally rectangular-shaped park is 340 hectares. It extends 4 kilometers between 59th and 110th Streets. City leaders had been playing with the idea for years of having a place in the middle of the increasingly crowded Manhattan Island suitable for rest and relaxation, with clean, fresh air and green to ease the eye. The plan of Frederick Olmsted and Calvert Vaux finally came true by 1870. The amount of work it took to clear the area from rocks is unimaginable. 10 million farm wagons of humus and arable soil were delivered here, artificial lakes were created, plants were set, statues erected, and a zoo built, as well as sports grounds, an open-air stage, and eateries. The employees of the surrounding office buildings like to spend their lunchtime in the park, munching on a sandwich, a hot dog, or a donut. Even today, mounted policemen look after the order and safety of the park. One day isn't enough to see the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Arts, even superficially. On the 2 floors of the Northern Annex, works of American artists of the 17th and 19th centuries are exhibited. The primitive tribal objects that can be seen on the opposite side of the covered inner courtyard originate from New Guinea and were bought by the young Rockefeller. He donated the majority of the Egyptian collection to the United States in 1968 when the Aswan Dam was constructed. The extraordinary building, which is the Guggenheim Museum, is Frank Lloyd Wright's most well-known creation. It is an organic creation in one big space extended to 1 floor, said the planner. Opened in 1984, the Trump Tower is located between 5th Avenue and Madison Avenue. The 68-story glass building was constructed according to Dare Scott's plans for the multimillionaire building contractor Donald J. Trump. Its impressive inner courtyard is striking even today with an artificial waterfall of 200 feet. Perhaps the most seasoned old hotel of the city is the Chelsea. Among its first guests were Mark Twain and his fellow writer, the chronicler of his hometown, O. Henry. The stars of the Barnum Circus also stayed here, as well as the grand actress Sarah Bernhardt. One of the most respected actors of our age, Dustin Hoffman, lived here for years, just as Arthur Miller, who wrote his play entitled Death of a Salesman here. Visitors included Laurence Olivier, Janis Joplin, and Marilyn Monroe. Arthur C. Clarke wrote several of his science fiction works here. The poet Dylan Thomas and writer Thomas Wolfe died here at the Chelsea. Rockefeller Center is the largest connected skyscraper city of the world with a total of 21 buildings. It's located in the heart of Manhattan between 5th and 6th Avenues. The lowered Rockefeller Plaza, decorated with the flags of the United Nations member states, is the center of the building complex. The skating rink is used by thousands of tourists and locals from autumn to spring, while in summer, specialties of English and French restaurants can be enjoyed in the sunshine or under parasols. The gilded Prometheus statue dominates the square. At the beginning of the 19th century, the area was the permanent residence of notable families with palaces of the Astors and the Vanderbilts adorning the neighborhood. 100 years later, the locations had lost in value due to the since-demolished high railway, which caused too much noise for the millionaires. During the era of Prohibition, secret bars were opened in run-down houses of the area. Finally, the son of oil millionaire Rockefeller rented the site on which to have the largest opera house of the world built. But due to the Great Depression, he abandoned the idea and started a more lucrative business. He commissioned the architect Wallace K. Harrison to plan a building complex consisting of several office buildings. Rockefeller Center is still the largest privately owned office and entertainment center in the world, where 35,000 people are working with a visitors number many times that. The Catholic Church, finished in 1879, bears the name of Ireland's patron saint, St. Patrick. One of the largest churches of New York looks small next to the skyscrapers, Rockefeller Center, and the Olympic Airways building. The headquarters of RCA, the largest radio and television producer, is in one of the buildings of the Rockefeller Center. On the other side of the block is the famous Radio City Music Hall, built in the 1930s. The hall has a seating capacity of 6,200, and the audience is entertained by artists, a symphony orchestra, and dance ensemble. This is followed by a film premiere in the second part of the program. We're walking in the heart of the Big Apple, to the south from Central Park, and a bit farther south from Rockefeller Center, one corner away from the famous Times Square. This area is famous for its theaters, among others, for the St. James, the Eugene O'Neill, the Biltmore, the Edison, the Majestic, the Playhouse, the Helen Hayes, the Palace, the Royal, and the Ambassador Theaters. The world-renowned Carnegie Hall is also nearby, where Tchaikovsky conducted the orchestra at its opening ceremony. During the more than 100 years since then, Toscanini, Stravinsky, Rubinstein, Stokowski, Horowitz, Menuhin, and Bernstein have conducted here, and the jazz performances have included such names as Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and Dizzy Gillespie. The old concert hall has been threatened several times with demolition, but the world's greatest musicians have always managed to collect enough money with their occasional concerts to be able to prevent this. The New York State Theater, the Philharmonic Hall, and the new Metropolitan Opera House are located in Lincoln Center, in the same destitute area where the gangs of West Side Story fought for life and death. 188 old buildings were destroyed to make room for this new giant, planned by the architect of the Kennedy Airport, the UN Palace, and the Rockefeller Center, Wallace K. Harrison. The Metropolitan Opera, with 3,800 seats, opened its doors in the spring of 1966. Its monumental 112-foot high entrance colonnade is decorated by murals by Marc Chagall. The plays of O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, Thornton Wilder, and Arthur Miller are still on in the theaters. The comedy writers Ray Cooney and Neil Simon are popular. Hotel Plaza, immortalized in the title of the successful comedy, can also be found in Manhattan, in West 58th Street. F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ferenc Molnar, Hemingway, and Arthur Miller also mentioned it in their writings. We find the Dakota Apartments in the neighborhood of Lincoln Center. They were built by a multimillionaire with an eccentric sense of taste. Its sad fame is that the greatest personality of pop music, John Lennon, was murdered at its gate. In America, there are statistics on everything. According to statistics, 45% of American films are played in the two biggest cities of the West Coast, in Los Angeles and San Francisco, 45% on the East Coast, in Washington and New York, and only the remaining 10% in other American cities. Filmmakers recorded the New York docks, New York harbor, New York sidewalks, New York's beauty, New York shades, New York lights, and New York bands. Especially John Cassavetes, Francis Coppola, Martin Scorsese, and Woody Allen are considered New York film directors. Renaissance, Dorset, Plaza, New York Hilton, Regency, Chelsea, Ritz-Carlton, Sheraton, Waldorf Astoria. Just some of the famous luxury hotels which can be proud of a really impressive guest list. There are more than 100,000 guest beds available in New York of various categories. Despite this, it can be difficult to find a room without advance reservation, as about 18 million tourists visit the city every year. The iron fire escapes, which were originally built for emergency reasons, give the city its individual atmosphere, and today not a decent building in New York can be imagined without them. In March, the big St. Patrick's Day parade attracts a lot of attention. A great number of Irish immigrants in America live in New York, and it's quite natural that visitors from the mother country arrive for the Irish patron saint's spectacular holiday. In April, a spring flower festival is held in Rockefeller Center and a circus holiday in Madison Square Garden. As good weather arrives, the number of open-air programs increases. In May, the Soho Festival is held and the Open Air Art Festival in Greenwich Village. Similar events are held in Brooklyn twice a year. The Italian, Jewish, Polish, and Puerto Rican immigrants all have their own holidays, mainly accompanied by colorful parades. Of course, the Big Apple also does its part for other main holidays, like Easter, Independence Day, Thanksgiving Day, Halloween, and Christmas. The city Christmas tree is raised in Rockefeller Center in early December, while an enormous New Year's Eve party is organized on Times Square with fireworks and street ball. The New York Public Library, a beautiful building in Beaux-Arts style, was designed by the Carrere and Hastings Architecture Company and was opened in 1911 on the former site of a reservoir. The majestic building of white marble was financed primarily by private donations, with half the expenses borne by the steel factory owner, Andrew Carnegie, who had the Carnegie Hall built. The library holds about 36 million objects, including 11.3 million books, and the holdings are from 3 private libraries, the Astor, the Lenox, and the Tilden libraries. In addition to books, 14 million manuscripts are also preserved here, and the Handbook Library contains 40,000 volumes. This is America's second biggest library, following the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. Many know the characteristic Chrysler Building Tower from King Kong movies. The romantic Art Deco tower block had been the highest building of the city for a year, until the Empire State Building was finished. Fashioned by William von Ahlen, it reaches 1,048 feet and attracts attention with its stainless steel arches and triangular windows, especially because the characteristic building can be seen well from anywhere. Fifth Avenue, and mainly its part between 34th and 59th Streets, is the most brilliant thoroughfare of the city, rightly called Millionaire's Row. In New York, there are approximately 12,000 taxis, the yellow cabs familiar from movies staged in the city. Taxi stands as such don't exist. The cars can be ordered by phone, but it's even easier to stand at the side of the road and hail one. If the light of the car doesn't show off-duty or radio call, it'll stop. The tower block of the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company was built in Renaissance style in 1909. Its clock is simultaneously the logo of the company. The diameter of its face is more than 20 feet. The weight of the hands is half a ton, and it plays a melody by Handel every 15 minutes. Steichen's world-famous picture showing a skyscraper covered in fog, glittering in the lights of the night lights, can be found in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This wedge-shaped tower block appears to be a huge beak. The building has been on Broadway since 1902, 2 corners away from Theodore Roosevelt's birthplace. Originally, D.H. Burnham planned it for the Fuller Company, therefore its name was the Fuller Building, but New Yorkers had been calling it the Iron Building for a long time. The flat iron building brings about much more attention than all the other buildings together in New York, wrote Architectural Record. Perhaps the most well-known architect of the world, the French Le Corbusier, called it one of the pioneer works of modern architecture. Trinity Church is one of those nice old churches whose Gothic decorations fit so well at the foot of the skyscrapers. This was a work by Richard Upjohn, built in 1885 and preserving the features of English style. On the morning of September 11, 2001, in a well-organized action, several terrorists occupied 4 airliners. American Airlines Flight Number 11 crashed into the northern tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 a.m., according to New York Time. At 9:03, United Airlines Flight 175 followed, smashing into the southern tower of the World Trade Center while TV stations were broadcasting. In Washington, American Airlines Flight 77 roared into the Pentagon building, while United Airlines Flight 93, intended for the White House, crashed in Pennsylvania State on a field near Shanksville. None of the passengers survived the explosions. The terror attack destroyed one of New York's most prominent symbols, the World Trade Center. Its twin towers caught fire after the crashes, and barely an hour later, they collapsed one after another. Although no terror organization has undertaken the whole responsibility for the attacks until today, investigations pointed to the Al-Qaeda terror group led by Osama bin Laden. In 1998, Al-Qaeda published a proclamation accusing the United States of supporting Israel, founding military bases on the Arabian Peninsula, and accusing them of aggression towards Iraq. The fatwa held out the prospect of punishing America. Based on this, the authorities accused the organization of perpetration of the organized terror sequences and started a war against the suspected and real terrorist, which has affected the whole world and has had serious aftermaths. We cannot yet know what political and economic interests led to the death of 3,000 innocent people, and remembering the Kennedy murder, there's not much chance we will ever know it. At the beginning of the attack, around midnight, a half-military kind of crisis operation was initiated. A commanding guard post was established at the fire department. Also, Mayor Rudy Giuliani's headquarters was there. The Salvation Army set up mobile kitchens. St. Vincent Hospital received the injured. On the opposite side of the river, in New Jersey, a temporary mortuary was set up. According to first estimates, tens of thousands of fatalities were expected, but summaries revealed that 2,986 people died in the attacks, including the 265 passengers of the 4 planes, 343 firemen, 23 policemen, and 37 harbor customs officials. In the tower buildings, in the surroundings, and the subway stations below the towers, a total of 2,318 victims were found. 25 buildings were damaged. Besides the World Trade Center block containing 7 buildings, also the Deutsche Bank building was so badly damaged that it had to be demolished. In addition, 4 subway stations were seriously damaged or partly caved in. Years have passed, and now the situation seems to have normalized. The remains have been cleared away. The victims have been mourned and buried. A heartbreaking memorial has been put up for them. However, the impact of the attempt is sadder. America and the world will never be the same as it was before September 11th. Humanity has lost its innocence. Several films have been made about the attempt, for example, The Guys with Anthony LaPaglia, United 93 with Mark Wahlberg, and World Trade Center with Nicolas Cage. According to an old decision of Congress, high buildings have to be narrowed toward the top in order to let more light to the streets. The Woolworth House, erected in 1911, was built according to Cass Gilbert's plans. Fellow architect Paul Goldberger said the following about it: "Its Gothic designs organically fit into the vertical shape of the 3-story building. It has an almost Mozartian quality to it, a sense of light, graceful detail applied to a firm and self-assured structure." Wall Street quickly became the synonym of New York's financial district. In Dutch times, a wall extended here protecting against English and Indian attacks, giving this part of the city its name. Today, the headquarters of the biggest banks and offices of several other financial and legal organizations are here. The Stock Palace of the city, the New York Stock Exchange, is not only the most significant such building in the world, but also the oldest one, founded in 1792. George B. Post planned the present building in 1903 modeled on Roman churches. Those who are interested can watch the milling from the round gallery of the 4-meter hall on weekdays. An exhibition illustrating the history of the stock exchange can be seen on the 3rd floor. Most of Greenwich Village visitors say it reminds them of the Latin Quarter in Paris or Soho in London. First, Dutch settlers chased away the native Mohawk Indians and established tobacco plantations here. They were followed by the English, who named the village settlement after their Greenwich next to the Thames. The quarter still preserves some of its former village atmosphere. Perhaps this is why artists also flock to it. In New York, with every step the tourist tracks his great ancestors, and this is true to an even greater extent here in the village. Here lived Theodore Dreiser, Edgar Allan Poe, Henry James, John Dos Passos, Sinclair Lewis, William Styron, and Edward Albee. The likes of Bob Dylan, Barbra Streisand, and Joan Baez started their path towards world fame from the stages of Off-Broadway. The village's newspapers were the first to publish the novels of John Updike and Tom Wolfe and poems by Allen Ginsberg. The art quarter is famous for its cafes, bars, pubs, and music clubs. A helicopter tour is a great adventure in New York. We can see even the Empire State Building from above, and the streets of Manhattan, the East River, the Hudson River, and the islands seem like a map below us. Battery Park is the green area of Manhattan's southern corner. In the Dutch settlers' time, women here said goodbye to their husbands going abroad. One of the statues standing here reminds us of Verrazzano, the Florentine sailor and discoverer of the bay, the other of James Fenimore Cooper, the world-famous writer of Indian and adventure stories. This park was his favorite place. Huge granite blocks stand in memorial of the merchant mariners who died at sea during World War II. From the promenade, we can watch the harbor traffic. Tankers and trade ships can be seen here, as well as huge luxury ocean liners. Small pleasure ships and the ferries to Staten Island, Governor's Island, and Liberty Island depart from here. The famous Statue of Liberty, as demonstrated by its name, is located on the latter. We can get there by boat in 20 minutes. The statue was made by France from public contributions and given to the United States on the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence as a symbol of the two nations' friendship. Originally, the sculptor Frederick August Bartholdi received the assignment for a huge statue named Egypt Brings Light to Asia, which would have represented the Colossus of Abu Simbel at the entrance of the Suez Canal. But Ismail Khedive, Egypt's king, found the project too expensive. Then the idea of a statue that could be presented to the States was born. Inspiration for the work was given by the main figure of a painting by Delacroix, Freedom Guiding the People. The model was the sculptor's mother. Gustave Eiffel planned the steel base, and its construction interrupted even the building of his famous tower for a while. The agreement was for the French to donate the statue, and the Americans should supply the foundation, which had originally been planned as an exhibition hall. Today, we can see the Immigrants Museum in it, which is part of Ellis Island. Between 1892 and 1924, 12 million people arrived to the Island of Tears, as Ellis Island was called. Here it was decided if the immigrant would receive permission for settlement. The authority was in operation until 1954. 40% of the inhabitants of the United States arrived in this way to the New World. And the crowds of settlers streamed in from the most varied countries, those who for centuries now have seen the New World as the home of freedom and unlimited possibilities. France quickly collected the necessary amount, but in America there was not so much disposition to give. Joseph Pulitzer, the founder of the Pulitzer Prize and owner of the New York World newspaper, in his paper praised enthusiastically those who contributed to the lofty aim. With this, he killed two birds with one stone, gaining 50,000 new subscribers while collecting the money. The head of the statue was first exhibited on the Champ de Mars in Paris, and a smaller model was introduced to the public at the World's Fair. By the time Richard Morris Hunt's pedestal was ready, the statue itself had also arrived on the deck of the frigate Isère in 350 pieces in 214 crates. The assembly took 4 months. On October 28, 1886, it was unveiled in the presence of President Grover Cleveland, who had previously been governor of New York and had refused to allot $50,000 from the state budget for the construction. It was probably due to the excitement that each time the president started his speech, one of the two zealous gunners fired his cannon. So the statue was unveiled with a 21-gun salute, but without presidential speech. At 111 feet, Miss Liberty holds the torch of freedom in her right hand. In her left hand, the Declaration of Independence. The total height of the seasoned green figure standing on its stone base is 305 feet. Its weight is 225 tons, and there's an observation terrace in the crown. Very likely this is the most famous statue in the world, and there's probably no one in the world who hasn't seen it, at least in a picture. In 1916, Gutzen Borglum modified the original torch, cutting the majority of the copper which formed the flame and installing inner lighting. There was a perfect view to the bay from the crown, where 30 people could stand at the same time. Following the attack on September 11th, the island was closed. The statue was reopened in August 2004. Presently, the basement and the museum can be visited, but the inner area of the statue has remained closed. The predecessor of the current city, New Amsterdam, was founded by Dutch settlers on the island of Manhattan, formerly inhabited by Iroquois Indians. Also, the name originates from here. Mannahatta means Island of Mountains and Waters. The Dutch founded their West Indian Company in the middle of the 1600s. At this time, about 300 settlers were living on the island in wooden houses, and they brought slaves from Africa to do the hard work. England didn't like this settlement among its colonies and soon besieged it. Then the Queen presented the newly obtained possession to the Duke of York, thus the name of the city. At this time, some thousands of British, Dutch, French, Spanish, and Portuguese settlers were living here, cultivating their modest fields. The eccentric Lord Cornbury was the first English governor. The establishing of the harbor, the ship factory, and ship maintenance all started in his time. The shipping trade was accompanied by the building of warehouses and shops. From the 1700s, businessmen with a good nose for profit were constantly establishing business quarters. Those dealing in cotton, textiles, leather, tea, spices, and products from the colonies arrived here. Those businessmen who became rich built impressive palaces in the city, which already boasted 25,000 inhabitants. From this time on, the development couldn't be stopped, in spite of the War of Independence and the Civil War. Turning to the right on Fulton Street, it's only a short walk to the park closed off from traffic, where there are nicely renovated buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries. In most of them, fishermen worked and lived, but today elegant restaurants and antique shops are to be found among their old walls. Even the atmosphere of luring the tourists doesn't detract from the beauty of the old red brick houses. The center of the New York harbor was in the docks of the South Street seaport, the base of overseas trade which made the city seem so big. When sailing ships were superseded by steamships, the the harbor was moved to the Hudson, enabling the building of bigger piers. The old East Side harbor began to decline. Only the Fulton Fish Market stayed the same. This is one of the largest markets of the world, where some 5,000 tons of foodstuffs are sold every day. Its main profile is the trade of a wide variety of fish and sea creatures, but the amount and selection of fruits and vegetables is also considerable. The fish market surroundings used to be the red light district, with brothels and sailors' pubs. These buildings today are just memories, but in Sloppy Louie, the most famous restaurant of the fish market, the huge cooked crabs and famous French onion soup are available, which according to experts here are even better than in Marseille. In the 1980s, the whole quarter was declared a historical monument and the reconstruction of the buildings was begun. The seaport was revived similarly to the famous docks in London. The trade houses of the Schemerhorn Row serve as the site of exhibitions, museums, art galleries, tourist offices, and of course, shops and restaurants. The old ships anchored here are the main attractions, but the eateries and the whole atmosphere invites visitors for a walk along the board-covered piers. A hospital ship is standing at Pier 15 and a ferry that used to travel between Manhattan and Governor's Island. The Wavertree is a three-master originating from 1825. Peking, anchored at Pier 16, is a four-master that sailed between Europe and South America as a member of a Hamburg trade fleet. Next to it stands the Ambrose, built in 1907, named after the channel lying at the southern entrance of the New York harbor. The harbor was in some spots too shallow, in some too deep, so that it was necessary to have a bright red lightship to aid them in entering the harbor. Since 1968, the Sandy Hook, a veteran of World War I, has been a part of this open-air exhibition. The most famous is Pier 17, where we find a modern shopping center, and the free and vital atmosphere is reminiscent of Coney Island. Simone de Beauvoir was also a proponent of the city. She said, "New York is a legend, a city containing everything, all the good and all the bad. It confuses and delights, stops and starts. New York cannot be described by words. I cannot really compose what I feel. I melt into the city and just watch and watch, admire everything like a blind man who has just recovered his sight." Tourists visiting New York like to visit nearby cities: Atlantic City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Niagara Falls. New Jersey, based on its territory, is only the 46th among American states, but 7.5 million people live here, so the density of population is quite high. New Jersey and New York State together are often referred to as Gate, but New Jersey is also called by its nickname the Garden State. This refers to the state's developed agriculture. In the last few decades, tourism has also played an ever-increasing role, as Washington is only 100 kilometers away, and New York is also nearby. A lot of people commute to one of the two cities. This and freight transport are the reasons for the 6, 8, or even 12-lane highways. However, the noise and dust of transport hardly affect the coast side of New Jersey. Here, idyllic holiday resorts and elegant residential towns stand on the former locations of fishing villages. Long Branch, Bradley Beach, Island Beach, and Asbury Park are also known for their conference tourism, while Ocean Grove is under church leadership, therefore the consumption of alcohol is forbidden. All the more licentious is Atlantic City, which became envious of the reputation of Las Vegas. The city has a special situation in the state, even on the whole East Coast. Until 1976, casino gambling was only allowed in the state of Nevada in the USA. At this time, New Jersey approved casino gambling so that the inhabitants of the East Coast need not travel as far as Nevada to play. The income originating from casinos and the increased tourism today amount to considerable revenues in the state budget. And like Vegas, there's also the possibility to build newer casinos, hotels, eateries, and entertainment places. Atlantic City was a favorite holiday resort earlier as well, the elegant vacation site of American multimillionaires and European aristocrats. The city continuously developed into an entertainment place of wider crowds. Each autumn, the final of the Miss America beauty pageant is held in its auditorium. The boardwalk, the board-covered promenade from the last century, follows the coast for 8.1 miles, and piers extending into the water are connected to it. On top of the central pier is a lighthouse of 171 feet. Vehicles are prohibited here. We can use bicycles or rickshaws among the fish restaurants, cafes, casinos, concert halls, merry-go-rounds, and sports grounds. For longer distances, hundreds of small buses facilitate visits to more and more casinos. Presently, 8 hotels combined with casino have opened their doors to guests, featuring roulette, poker, baccarat, and blackjack. Here it was never an intention to redream the channels and gondolas of Venice, the Triumphal Arch and Eiffel Tower of Paris, or the pyramids of Egypt. The sceneries of the casinos here refer to America and the Wild West. We can walk among caves, mines, farmhouses, gold digger settlements, covered wagons, and Indian teepees. We can have drinks in Wild West saloons, while at every corner one-armed bandits peer at us. Sandy Hook Peninsula faces the entrance of the harbor of New York. The main city of western Pennsylvania, wedged in between New York State and New Jersey, is Pittsburgh, which, among other things, is famous for its Andy Warhol Museum. From its smaller cities, Lancaster, Reading, and the citadel of chocolate production, Hershey, are worth mentioning, as well as York, where Harley-Davidson motors are produced. Gettysburg is famous for the crucial battle of the Civil War. The most populous city of the state is Philadelphia. The Declaration of Independence was signed here on July 4, 1776, and for a long time, it was the capital of the USA. Its population exceeds 7 million. It has a busy harbor which received thousands of immigrants during the past centuries, giving it its multicultural flair, as perhaps all of the world's nations are represented in this city. It's full of superlative museums, hotels, restaurants, and other attractions. Its most famous building is Independence Hall, built in 1748. Among its walls, the Declaration of Independence was signed. The building is located in the Independence National Historical Park that is also the location of protected buildings originating from the 17th century. Among others to be found here is the U.S. Mint, the oldest mint of the USA that is still in operation. The Liberty Bell was placed in a separate building of the park on the 200th anniversary of American independence. Behind it are the Congress Hall and the Old City Hall, two beautiful old buildings. The famous Masonic temple is the Tabernacle of the Pennsylvania Grand Lodge. Also worth visiting are the famous museums of the city. The Independence Seaport Museum, which shows American naval traditions, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts Picture Gallery, the Barnes Foundation Exhibition Hall with Van Gogh, Renoir, and Rousseau paintings, and the Rodin Museum, the Edgar Allan Poe House, and the Benjamin Franklin Museum. The United States is the original home of shopping, of doing something for pleasure. The favorable places, the wide selection, the regular discounts make American big cities a shopper's paradise. The cheap Woolworth, the cut above Bloomingdale, and the Macy's of higher standard are waiting for customers in larger cities. There's probably no clothing or shoe producer who doesn't have a chain store or outlet in the United States. Washington was built in the northeastern coastal region of the Atlantic Ocean. The official geographical center of the American capital is Capitol Hill. On this hill stands the building of Congress. The 800-foot-long domed palace is located in the middle of a park of 60 hectares. The idea of building the Capitol originates from George Washington, and its plan originates from William Thornton. When Congress decided on building a totally new Capitol, President Washington assigned the French engineer Pier to prepare the plans. He rode with him to Capitol Hill in the summer of 1791, and they decided then to place the center of the new Capitol there. Finally, William Thornton, a doctor by occupation and who was considered only an amateur planner, won the advertised design competition. The Jefferson Memorial occupies a spot in the middle of a park, a bit south of the mall. The neoclassic work is connected to the famous architect John Russell Pope's name, and it was officially dedicated in 1943. On the rounded walls, 4 gates open to the 4 cardinal points. The pediment relief situated above the main entrance, illustrating Jefferson and other leaders of the independence movement, is Adolf Weinmann's work. The dome of the Jefferson Memorial is 150 feet in diameter and 100 feet high. President Jefferson's 20-foot bronze statue in the Dome Hall is the work of Rudolph Evans. The dignified, cloaked figure stands on a black granite pedestal. On the wall, quotations from Jefferson are engraved in stone. Arlington Hill used to be the property of General Robert E. Lee, the leader of the Confederate Army. Following the Civil War, the area was confiscated and the deceased heroes of the war were buried here. The eternal flame in the middle of the circle covered with marble stones is in memory of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, who was assassinated in 1963 and whose grave is a place of pilgrimage for many. The motives of the assassination are to this day unclear, and the murderer never faced a court of law. Will we ever know the truth? And why does it seem as if the CIA would like to keep secret what they know? Wide stairs lead up to the quiet, dignified final resting place of the unknown soldier. The memorial was originally raised for the unknown victim of the First World War, then 2 other victims of the Second World War and the Vietnam War were also buried next to him. The ceremonial change of guards occurs every hour. The War Memorial of the Marines is the Iwo Jima statue. The fountain is surrounded by marble pillars that symbolize the American states. President William Taft, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, Senator Robert Kennedy, Generals Sheridan, Pershing, and Marshall, and the Arctic explorer Admiral Richard Byrd also rest in the cemetery. At the western end of the mall, on the bank of the river, stands the Lincoln Memorial. The white marble building is reminiscent of Greek temples, which is no accident, as Henry Bacon used the Parthenon as inspiration. The roof is supported by 36 Doric columns. There are 36 pillars because when Lincoln died, the country consisted of 36 states. The building was dedicated in 1922. By this time, the statue created by Daniel Chester French, standing 20 feet by 20 feet, had been completed. Robert Mills designed the obelisk of the Washington Monument, and the 541-foot Greek colonnade and reflecting pool were also his idea. The ellipse has a grassy area connected to the mall. Every year, the huge White House Christmas tree is set up in this park, and the Zero Milestone is also here. The White House, the residence of the presidents, is perhaps the best-known building in the world. TV crews and onlookers gather daily behind its iron trellised gate. Niagara isn't the biggest, but probably the best-known waterfall in the world. Human hands domesticated the rumbling natural miracle near the national border separating the USA and Canada. The waterfall that is between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie is one of the most admired sights in North America. In 1885, the surroundings were declared a national park and nature reserve. The waterfall can be observed from several vantage points. Regardless of the method chosen, walking tour, boat, or helicopter, you'll have an unforgettable sight. Let's start the tour on Goat Island, which we approach from the lookout by railway. This island divides the river into the approximately 200-foot-high American Falls and the Canadian Falls, only 7 feet lower. The latter is connected to a smaller waterfall called Bride's Veil. Here we can choose to descend by lift to the point where the white, frothing water rumbles into the river, or we can go up to see the waterworks from a helicopter. Rainbows are projected onto the sky from sunbeams breaking the sparkling surface of the water, breaking the monotony of the shades of blue and white.